Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about three 1796 Saber replicas. I have one from Cold Steel, one from Windlass, and one from LK Chen. Before I get into the video, a couple quick disclaimers you should know about the provenance of the swords, where I got them. The Cold Steel is one I bought secondhand and therefore may not be representative of a brand new sword, but do know I spent my own money on it. It's part of my collection. There's that one. The Windlass example is a review sample that was sent to me a while ago from Windlass, so tip of my hat and thanks to them for sending it my way, but I didn't spend any money on it. If you think that makes me biased, you know up here at the start. The last is an example from LK Chen, and that is on loan from sword friend Andy Delatric Swords. I'll link his channel in the description down below. I'd encourage you to check it out, as well as measurements and links to all of these things if you're interested in getting any one in particular. Also worth noting, these are not an exhaustive list of the 1796 replicas that are out there. If you look on Cult of Athena, you can find others. There are custom-made examples and there are historic pieces out there that you can buy as well. It's as for military sabers, one of the more commonly reproduced. These are three relatively prolific, well-regarded examples or things that enter into a lot of people's collections, and they also happen to be the ones that I have. So I'm going to talk about these three, but do know there are others out there, and they may be better or worse. Anyway, the other bit that you should know is that I don't study historic European martial arts. I certainly don't study military saber fencing. I did study Olympic fencing in the way back when, but I focused mostly on foil and épée. Saber hurt when I got slapped with it, so I kind of avoided that as a kid. But what does that mean in terms of my competence with these weapons? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. I'm not in a position of authority with these weapons, really any of them, but especially these. I don't know how to use them, and so if I look like a buffoon moving them around, I feel that way too, and you are right to judge me so. However, that doesn't mean that I can't give you some impressions on build quality and general fun for backyard shenanigans. And so if you are a person thinking about adding a 1796 to your collection because you have seen them cut or you've heard about their cutting prowess, you want to experiment with a military reproduction sword so you don't damage a historic original, and you were wondering which one to get, hopefully this video gives you some things to look at, some perspective, and helps you spend your money better. Anyway, that's what the goal is. So I'm going to go over the bits and bobs and fits and features and all of these. I will compare cutting them on at the same time using the same mediums, and then I'll tell you which one I like towards the end. So I'm going to start with the Cold Steel right here. And so this is $369, nice, as of the recording of this video, but you can find it for $300 on Cult of Athena, or at least you could when I went and looked for it. So I'm going to consider it a $300 sword. Now, immediately I notice in comparison to the others, this one is threaded. I haven't taken this off, so I don't know how easy it is, but I can tell you it doesn't screw off by hand. And if I were to take a pliers or something, I'm going to mar it up, and I might not get it back on as tight as it is, so I'm not going to take it apart. However, it is threaded, so it's got this little hat on the bottom, and I don't know if that's something that all of the examples had or didn't have, but it's certainly present on this one. All of them have this D-guard here, and the two examples from both Cold Steel and Windlass, I would say, are relatively similar. They're chamfered around the edge. None of them create a hot spot. All of them fit my big, giant, dumb sausage fingers. And the grip as well is wrapped in leather. This one has a little bit more obvious ribbing to it, so I can both feel the ribs and see them visually. The little metal backing on here, I'm not sure exactly what this is called, but it fits on here in such a way where I can feel it with my fingers, but when I was cutting with it in a bare hand, I didn't create any hot spots. It didn't make it slippery or anything odd about it. And so I would say generally the grip fits well in my hand. It also doesn't really have any decoration or anything like that, and grip-wise, I can hold on to it, I can feel it. It doesn't break my grip in any conceivable, noticeable way, but it also isn't super tight. So if I kind of white knuckle the sword and try to move it by the guard, I can, but I didn't notice it slipping when I was cutting any of the mediums that I was cutting. Before I talk about the blade, I'll talk briefly about the scabbard. I can notice some brazing marks on here where these retention hangers are placed, as well as around where the end is closed off. It has a lot of ripples and whatnot in the surface. It's not that it's been dented, but it looks like it's been hammered out. It's got two screws on here, which are presumably to hold in this little top piece, and it doesn't look like there's any liner in this one or any of them, frankly. So the metal scabbard means that you kind of got to be careful as you put it in and take it out, because running the edge along metal means that you may diminish your edge pretty substantially and relatively quickly. Talking about the blade, it has the 1796 profile, and honestly all of these look relatively similar. There's maybe some slight differences in dimension, which you may notice in the description down below, but not really. They're kind of in silhouette all look the same, but they all look quite a bit different in in distal taper profile, which may or may not be in the description down below. Anyway, this one is chunky. And so what does that mean? That means blade-wise, it's very thick at the bottom. It does have distal taper. I know these have a reputation for being heavy, the cold steel variety in particular, and it certainly is, but it certainly also has distal taper. It's not that it's a one bar, it has profile to it. In practice though, when I swing this, I absolutely feel like it is something I have to learn how to use. And that's important because it contrasts quite a bit with some of the other examples. So as I throw it out there and cut with it, it takes effort to start it. It takes effort to stop it. And I don't always feel like I can get the tip where I want, and I certainly feel like I couldn't be very effective with this as a weapon. So if I was trying to cut and guard and use this defensively, I would struggle with it. It's also a bit of a bear to move around. So when I was cutting, I'm much quicker to fatigue with this because I don't know how to use it, so I tend to use a lot with my wrist and my arm rather than my core and my hips. But it is a beast to move around. It also doesn't have a particularly great edge on it. If I put a better edge on it, it would absolutely cut better. It didn't come with a particularly great edge, and I haven't done much to keen it up. So it more or less slaps things around when I go cut them. But at the same time, it could have a better edge on it if I was willing to put in the effort of doing it. It's rough enough where it's going to take some effort to really get a good edge on it, and I'm going to lose some of the polishing on it. It's going to be a little bit of a battle to get an edge on this. I don't feel like I'm necessarily competent enough to do it. It's at the edge of my skill, I guess I'll say. But anyway, this is not unwieldable, is the point I would also make here. So while it has a reputation for being stout, some people say it's not even a viable saber. I don't think so. I feel like I can get it out there, and with practice, I feel like I could learn how to use this and still do it effectively. It's just, I don't think I could do that today without training with it. Out in the backyard, it's hard to start and stop. At the same time, it's not unwieldable. And with some practice, or if that's your preference, I think it might be an enjoyable sword. Now, moving on to the windlass variety, it's worth calling out that both of these are actually probably windlass. So the cold steel iteration, I believe, is also manufactured by Windlass. I could be wrong on that, but they have some very striking similarities that would lead me to believe that's the case. This, though, the Windlass variety is one that is a slightly more refined version after Matt Easton and Windlass worked together. Supposedly they got sent a historic original and based the model on that they sell off that. And the result is something that dynamically feels a little better. I'll talk about that in a moment. Some other things just to note about the bits and bobs. So one, we have a peen here, so that immediately is a little bit different. The rest of it honestly feels very similar. This little flap here is a little bit larger than on the cold steel variety. It also is chamfered in a way where I don't feel it when I kind of reach around here and try to grab it or run my fingernails against it. I don't feel this back plate on my fingers as well. Now, it didn't cause any discomfort in the cold steel when I was using it, but I don't even feel it on the Windlass. It's bigger in some spots and smaller in the other. The ribbing is more even, but also more subtle. I can't make it out as well. However, in my hand, it fills my palm quite well, and my index finger can kind of lock on where this collar plate is right here, and it just rests in my hand a little bit better. So if I draw the sword, white knuckle it and try to move it, it stays locked in my hand quite a bit better. It feels like it's made of the same materials, but it doesn't swirl around in my hand. Now you may also notice that the guard has a little bit of a ting to it. It doesn't move visibly. I can't feel it moving, but something in there is clicking. So it does have that going for it. The edges on the D guard are chamfered. It feels relatively solid. I feel like I could give a good bop in the face with it. And the I don't know, langets, shallots, something, these little pieces over here are also a little bit smaller. So on one hand, this little flap here is bigger and this one here is smaller. A slight visual difference despite being made by the same folks. The cold steel also has this little ringlet here, and it stays relatively thick on the cold steel, and it tapers down on the Windlass example. And that is something that is reducing weight. It seems like there's a few different efforts to reduce weight here, but I don't notice it, at least in the gauge of steel or anything obvious there. Now, blade profile, again, they both look about the same. This almost looks a little wider in profile than the cold steel. I could be wrong on that. The edge geometry is marginally better. I think that's mostly not because the edge is necessarily a different apex, but because it has more distal taper. It starts thinner and it gets much thinner out at the end. I think the grind that they use to sharpen these has less meat to go for, so the edge feels a little sharper. Not exactly sure, but I did have better luck cutting with this one. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, in feeling, this still has a very substantial stout feeling, but it's more maneuverable. So whatever they've done to kind of save weight, whether it be through the distal taper that they've implemented here, which starts thinner and gets much thinner, it means that I still feel like there's authority in the cut, but I feel like I can get the point where I want. It's not entirely intuitive yet, but it certainly feels much more fun to move around, much less of a bear, much more controllable, and is certainly a step in the right direction. It feels less cumbersome in the hand. It feels more like a weapon to me. I certainly think that this one is a more refined version, unless you happen to really like stout feeling swords. Now, talking about the blade, I still see surface ripples, just like on the cold steel. I still have a non-lined metal scabbard that I have to be very gingerly with putting away. I still see a lot of surface ripples that look like this was hand hammered out, and I still make out all the brazing and I don't know, like copper or brass looking stuff around where these retention hangers are. But there are some improvements there, and it certainly does feel better in the hand. Now, moving on to the LK Chen example, there's quite a few different things going on because it's actually a different manufacturer. So one, there is a peen. It's smaller, I guess, but I can't get a fingernail on it, and generally you don't hold the sword down here. The grip is also smaller, and I would say better defined. So I can make out each of the ribbing. They're generally quite well even and well placed, and the grip is just a little narrower. And for me, even though I have meaty sausage hands, it feels really solid in my hand. I feel like I'm much more connected to it. It's much easier to line up, and it stays really solid in my hand. So again, white knuckle it, try to turn it. I can't really get it to budge, and there's no clicking or tinging this time. Scabbard wise, it also is quite a bit different. I don't make out the same hammer bangs. There are some ripples in the surface, but it doesn't look like it's made from a hammer as much as, I don't know, bending the steel or something. And I don't make out brazing on the retention hangers or towards the end here. And this also looks like it's been kind of sanded down into one little piece. I don't see any liner or anything, so you'd have to be careful. These screws on the side as well are a little beefier and a little bit more noticeable than they are on the cold steel and windlass variety. Now, as for the other bits on the guard, this one is meatier than the windlass along the spine, but still relatively beefy. It has very similar shapes and profiles, but these little flaps and this little langet thing here, I'm not sure what they're called, are all a little different size and shape on each one of them. But generally, they feel solid. Grip-wise as well, I can't really move around and get my finger stuck on anything. There's no hot spots, but I can feel this little rivet here more than I can on the cold steel or windlass because it's been sanded down on those. So I do notice it, but it doesn't create any discomfort. And generally speaking, I think the grip is more comfortable on the LK Chen variety. Now the blade as well has much smoother, much fewer ripples in the surface. So if you're looking down it this way, which is definitely the way everyone looks at swords all the time, it looks a little bit cleaner. In profile, has the same kind of 1796 shape, but this way, it's quite a bit thinner. It starts thinner. It also takes a more drastic distal tapered profile, so it starts relatively thick and starts thinning down gradually. Then it thins down quite a bit, and then it thins down even more out at the end here to where it's very, very thin out at the edge. Also, the edge is very, very sharp. It doesn't really have a secondary bevel. It looks like it's almost a zero bevel or a single bevel from where the edge begins up here. Leaves plenty of room for sharpening, but it's a very fine edge. So when I go out and I cut things with it, well, it cuts a lot better. This was a joy to cut with. I didn't hone any of them. I kind of used them just in the condition that they were. This one absolutely kind of lasers through things, and it has the edge to do it in the geometry behind that edge to really be a fun backyard cutter for water bottles, pool noodles, lighter targets, things like that. I imagine it would do quite well on tatami as well. There's a price to pay for that though, so when I got this, there was some very superficial edge damage. It feels like something even I could fix though, so you'd be aware that there's probably going to be a price to pay if you cut things that don't want to be cut. If you hit armor, nails, staples, things like that, you're more likely to chip or roll this edge because of the nature of how thin it is. Not because it's bad, just because it's a little thinner and less robust than the others. But if I ground any of those down and put a very fine edge on it, it would have similar challenges. Anyway, this is much thinner, and dynamically, it moves like a stick in my hand, honestly. I feel like I can reach out and trim your eyelashes with it. It's very light. It feels like an extension of my arm almost. The curve is a little bit weird. I have to kind of get used to it despite my propensity to train with curved swords. This is marginally unfamiliar, but much more familiar in the hand. It feels like I can be very precise. It feels like I can get my hand where I want to be defensive, and it also just zips through targets. I can do little things like wrist flicks and things like that. So in terms of moving around, I found this to be certainly more fun. All right, sword friends, hopefully some of the close-ups of the bits and bobs, me moving it around, you get to see my horrible cutting and me comparing them has given you enough information to decide which one of these is worth your hard-earned money. It's time for me to answer the question though myself, which one do I prefer? And honestly, I think they all have their place and I think they appeal to different people, but with that, you know, kind of cop-out out of the way, I would say the LK Chen is my favorite. This moves delightfully, and that's really what I'm looking for as a collector. I don't study how to use this particular sword. I understand LK Chen has generally a good track record with recreating historically accurate replicas, so this likely is historically accurate. I don't know enough to really say if it is or isn't, but that isn't what I'm looking for in this style sword personally. I want something that's fun to cut with. I want something that is in the ballpark or wheelhouse of a 1796, but better made than the historic replicas, and something that I can just have fun with. And that's exactly what this did. It feels like it has the best grip. It overall looks the part of a 1796, and it just feels like a stick in my hand. I can immediately go out there and move it around and zip and cut through water bottles and pool noodles, and it holds up to tatami reasonably well. And that's what I'd want from a sword like this, and it does that job really well, better than the other examples. And I think better than the other examples, even if I sharpen them to a better degree. It just has better geometry, and it's thinner, and I can't sharpen in better dynamics, which is why I like this sword probably most, but also it performed best in my hand. So I would choose this one. Now it's $390 in the LK Chen website, which I probably should have mentioned earlier in the video, and it's $490-ish on the Cult of Athena website. The Cult of Athena is probably cheaper or free shipping, depending on you know, when you buy. The LK Chen, I believe you have to pay for shipping, and that's going to cost some of what that savings might be. So this is the most expensive variety, at the same time the most fun. Between the Windlass and Cold Steel, I would go with the Windlass. It's not going to be a big surprise here. This has still a stout feeling. I feel like if I sharpened it, I could still get a lot of authority into Tommy Mac cutting and to do some medium cutting, but I like the grip a little bit more, and it dynamically feels a little bit more comfortable. I still feel like I have to learn how to use the sword rather than it being completely intuitive. However, it still, I don't know, it has that stouter, chunkier feeling, which I think people will like, and at the same time, I can still move it around without too much effort. So this would be maybe the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold kind of area. If you were looking for something with a little bit more oomph, you're comfortable putting a keener edge on it, this example from Windlass may be better suited. Now the example from Cold Steel, I think is really going to be suited to people who either A, want something that's easier to disassemble and do some customization on themselves. That could be a factor that really is important to you, or you like stouter swords. Maybe you have a horse and you want to go around whacking watermelons, and you want the weight of the sword to do some of that work. Well, that is what this is going to do. It's not a huge amount of additional weight, but it's enough, certainly, and you absolutely feel it in your wrist. If you were doing some sort of training where you wanted to not use your wrist and wanted to engage your core, this would drive you to do technique better as a training tool, I would imagine, because it's not fun to move around if you're doing little whippy wrist things. So whether it's your preference, whether it's a training tool, I absolutely think it has a purpose. It's just not for me. Going in my backyard and whacking stuff, I don't have a lot of fun using the Cold Steel. I'm not going to attempt Cavalry Saber on a bicycle. I'll likely hurt myself. So the Cold Steel is the one I had the least entertaining time with, which is the least expensive. The Cold Steel you can get for about $300. The Windlass was $369. Nice, and the LK Chen was $488. So they gradually, as you spend more money, I like them more, which isn't always true, but seems to be true with this example. Now, there have been other options out there that you can buy. I know Depika and Universal Swords both make them. I'd venture a guess they're probably going to be similar to the Cold Steel. That's purely subjective, nonsensical reasoning on my part, just from what I've seen and heard, but I have not held either of those two. You can go buy a historic 1796. They seem to be between $800 and $12 for a pretty mediocre example. Maybe my pricing is off. It could be, depending on when you watch the video, but as I looked, if there's one that comes up, they seem to be around there. Pristine examples likely cost quite a bit more though. And Plus 5 Armory made a delightful handmade coal-forged example that was over $2,000 that I got to see at Blade Show. That was a delightful feeling sword and was very historically made, probably more probably made the hard way more than the historic example, so there are other options out there is the point. But if you're looking for a relatively inexpensive or under $500 that is fun in the backyard, the LK Chen would be the recommendation, or the one that I would choose. Anyway, that's what I've got, so tip of my hat to the folks at Windlass for sending me the review sample. Also, thanks to Swordfin Andy for lending me the LK Chen example. Hopefully the video has been helpful. Cheers, and thanks for watching.